I always thought the peak of family humiliation had been the day my grandmother introduced me to a neighbor as the girl I raise because she was left over. I was 15, carrying a torn backpack and a moderate desire to disappear. Turns out I was wrong. The peak hadn't arrived yet. It came years later, in a dark wood-paneled room that smelled like expensive mold and unresolved people wearing black as if mourning could be a costume. It was the day of the will reading. It was the day my grandmother looked straight at me, in front of the lawyer, my uncles, my cousins, two clerks, and a crooked crucifix on the wall, and said, "You're not family. Therefore, you don't get anything."
Just like that.
No tremor in her voice. No drama. A dry sentence, as if she were commenting on the weather. "It might rain today. You're not family." I took a deep breath. It didn't help. Before anyone had the decency to fake outrage, the lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and added, "Well, then I suppose it's time to open the second envelope." In that moment, I had the very clear feeling that my grandmother was pulling one last cruel stunt. Later I found out it was something else. Cruelty she'd already exhausted while alive. This was planning. My name is Mariana. I'm 32 years old. And, officially, I'm the granddaughter of the woman who decided to disinherit me before she ever left me anything. But that's the end of the story. Or almost. To understand the day of the will, you need to understand the kind of family that finds it easier to cut people out than to cut a habit. My grandmother Helena was one of those women trained to survive, not to be kind. Daughter of immigrants, sewing since childhood, she married the first man who promised to pull her away from the sewing machine.
He did.
And sat her in front of the stove. They had 3 children, my 2 uncles, Roberto and Carlos, and my mother, Elisa, the middle one, the quiet one, the one my grandmother called soft. By the time I was born, my mother already carried on her back a whole collection of bad decisions made with good intentions. My father was one of them. He arrived the way most disasters walk into the life of a tired woman, charming, funny, full of promises, and violently allergic to responsibility. They stayed together just long enough. Long enough to make me. Long enough for him to leave before choosing my name. He walked out when I was 2 months old. Literally, took a backpack, 2 shirts, and a guitar. My grandmother never forgave my mother for that. "Men don't leave on their own," she'd say. "Either they're kicked out, or they don't feel at home." In her mind, my father leaving was my mother's fault. And by some poetic and completely illogical extension, it was half my fault too. I grew up hearing, "If it weren't for that girl, you'd have your life together." I was the girl. The girl was me. My mother died when I was 12. I won't romanticize it. It was fast, ugly, and unfair. A sudden aneurysm that appears out of nowhere and is very committed to finishing the job. I was at school when it happened. They called me to the principal's office. The director gave me that "we studied education, not obituaries" look and said, "Your grandmother is coming to pick you up, dear." I asked, "And my mom?" She took a deep breath. Never has a sigh told me so much and so little at the same time. My grandmother arrived an hour later. She didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She just said, "Let's go. There's a lot to sort out." That night, I slept in the guest room at her house. The next night, too. And the next. On the 3rd night, I asked, "Grandma, how long am I staying here?" She answered, "Until I find someone willing to put up with you." She never found anyone. Not because she wanted to keep me. Because no one else wanted the full package. Orphan, poor, a teenager, already with a longer list of silences than school grades. So by elimination, I stayed. But never as a granddaughter. As an obligation. Some people raise children out of love. Others raise them out of fear of judgment. My grandmother raised me because she didn't see another option. She made a point of saying that at Sunday dinners, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, whenever anyone praised my manners, I just did what had to be done. I wasn't going to let my daughter's kid thrown out on the street. Her tone was martyrdom, not affection. I thanked her. Sometimes out loud. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes by just washing the dishes faster. My uncles, Roberto and Carlos, always knew they were the real ones. Roberto was the oldest. Ran a gas station, he insisted on calling the business. Married to a woman permanently on a diet and on occasional good terms with God, he had 2 sons, Lucas and Gustavo, the kind of boys who thought being poor was a personal aesthetic choice. Carlos, the youngest, was a university professor, the type who quotes authors nobody's read to explain very human decisions. He had 1 daughter, Beatriz, who went to expensive schools, did an exchange abroad, and came back with the accent of someone who spent 2 weeks overseas and the ego of someone who colonized a continent.
Me?
Public school, worn-out uniform, organized notebooks. I was the only one in the family who got into a federal university. No prep course, no exchange program, no Harvard said yes photos. When my result came out on a hot afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand. My grandmother was peeling potatoes. I got in, I said. Psychology. Federal University. She didn't look up. Is it free? She asked.
Yeah.
Then fine. That's how I celebrated the biggest achievement of my life so far, by learning that if there was no cost involved, at least I wasn't a problem. Deep down, I still had that tiny hope that one day she'd look at me with the same automatic pride she had when she said, "My oldest son is a businessman. The youngest is a professor." When people asked about me, she said, "The girl studies, helps out here at home." I didn't have a name. I was the girl. That helps explain why, years later, hearing "you're not family" didn't exactly sound new. It was just the legal version of what I'd understood for a long time. My grandmother wasn't a monster. Monsters are too simple. She was a tired human being, shaped by a brutal life, who learned to survive cutting pieces off herself and everyone else. And she had good moments. It's important to say that, so this doesn't sound like some cartoon villain origin story. There were Sundays when she baked cornmeal cake and let me lick the bowl. There were nights she stayed up late sewing and allowed me to sit next to her, drawing in a notebook, without complaining about the light. There were moments when she'd say, "You take after your mother when you bite your tongue instead of starting a fight. That's good." She didn't talk much, but she thought a lot. I collected those lines like crumbs of sunlight in a cloudy place. If she taught me one thing without meaning to, it was discipline. Wake up early. Do what needs to be done. Finish what you start. Don't ask for anything twice. I started working early, tutoring kids, helping with homework, teaching math nobody wanted to do. I entered university, worked as an intern in the morning, studied in the afternoon, corrected tests for lazy teachers at night. My life fit into bus routes and tight schedules. Meanwhile, my cousins posted photos from trips, parties, family dinners where I was either serving, holding bags, or cut out of the picture. Not out of explicit malice. Sometimes exclusion just becomes a habit. When my grandmother got sick, no one wanted to admit she was actually sick. She started forgetting words, repeating sentences, burning rice. "It's just age," they said. But I recognized the difference between distracted and something's wrong. I was studying psychology. I'd seen that before in patients, in textbooks, in case studies. I started going to doctor's appointments with her. I insisted on seeing a neurologist. My uncles complained. "Stop inventing illness, girl. Mom's fine. She's just old. Don't fill her head with stuff from your books." The exam came back. Alzheimer's, early stage. I saw the report before anyone else because the doctor looked at me like I was the only person in that family likely to actually listen. "She's going to need someone present," he said. "Things will get worse slowly, then all at once. You'll need to organize yourselves as a family. You all." The most optimistic phrase in that office. I took the report home, sat at the kitchen table again, this time with her diagnosis in my hands and a knot in my throat. My grandmother listened in a silence that was more wall than pause. "In the end," she said, "so, I'm going to forget things." "You'll forget some," I answered. "Others no." She let out a humorless laugh. It would be nice to forget a few people. I knew exactly who she meant. I called a family meeting. They arrived late, blaming the traffic, gas prices, parking, the weather, everything except their own reluctance. I explained the diagnosis calmly. The doctor says we need to organize. Share responsibilities. Rotations, bills, meds, daily routine. Roberto cut in. Mariana, I got 2 kids to raise and a business to run. I can't just become a nurse. Carlos added. I teach morning, afternoon, and night. I can't be here every day. I took a breath. I got my own life too. Work, university, internship, but we can't just dump everything on her. My grandmother watched silently. Beatriz, Miss Exchange Program and Ego, was on her phone. Lucas and Gustavo were arguing about soccer. After 30 minutes of, I can't, I don't have time, it's impossible, the grand solution that emerged was as creative as a brick. You already live with her, Mariana, Roberto decreed. It's easier for you to handle everything. Carlos nodded. We'll help with money when we can. When we can is as empty as someday. I knew that. My grandmother pulled me aside into the kitchen afterward. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, she said, unusually serious. I gave a small half-smile. Grandma, I've never done anything I wanted here. Only what needed to be done. This won't be the moment I start choosing. She looked at me with a mix of pride and guilt. You're stronger than I deserved. I didn't answer. If there's one thing those years taught me, it's that love isn't what people post. It's what they do when no one is watching. My cousins posted pictures from family barbecues. I was washing sheets at 2 in the morning because my grandmother had forgotten she already turned on the washing machine. They took selfies with her on holidays, hugging, kissing, writing my example of strength under the photo. I held her hand when she cried because she couldn't remember where she'd put her late husband's documents, a man who'd been dead 20 years. They brought cake on her birthday and left after half an hour. I stayed to clean up after she spilled soda on the tablecloth and couldn't remember how. Over time, she started mixing up names. Sometimes she called me Elisa, sometimes just the girl. There were good days when she remembered childhood stories in vivid detail, down to the color of curtains and the smell of bread. And there were bad days when she stared at the bedroom door and asked, Has your father come home yet? I'd answer, No, Grandma. He's not coming. She'd shake her head like she was wrestling with some invisible thought.
Better that way.
I never knew if she meant for him or for me. A year after the diagnosis, my grandmother set up an appointment with the lawyer. I went with her. She got dressed as if she were going to a party. Heavy fabric dress, low shoes, hair pinned up more carefully than usual. In the waiting room, she clutched her purse tightly. Grandma, do we really need to do this today? I asked. You're tired. She looked at me with the clearest eyes I'd seen from her since the diagnosis. It's because I'm tired that I won't wait. The lawyer was a middle-aged man with a quiet tie and the air of someone who had already measured every shade of greed in town. He greeted us with practiced formality. Mrs. Helena, you said you wanted to review your will. Not review, she cut him off. Rewrite. I tried to step in. Grandma. She raised her hand. Mariana, you're only here to listen today. So I listened. It felt strange. I'd spent my whole life listening without being heard. That day, listening carried a different weight. She dictated how she wanted to divide the house, the land, the savings. At first, it all sounded traditional. House to the eldest son. Land to the youngest. Jewelry to the daughter, who was no longer alive, so the lawyer explained they'd go to the next in line. My cousins. Nothing for me. Not a mention. Something twisted inside my chest. Not because I'd expected anything. I hadn't. But explicit absence hurts more than open dislike. When she finished distributing everything in the main document, the lawyer asked, Are you sure about these provisions, ma'am? She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then said, I am. But I want to add a condition. He raised his pen. You can specify. I want you to prepare 2 versions. The main will, and an additional letter, in a separate envelope, with my instructions. And that letter is only to be read after everyone hears the first one. He frowned slightly. A sort of addendum? She gave half a smile. A sort of truth. I looked at her confused. Why, Grandma? She met my eyes. Because there are things this family only understands when it hits their wallet. The lawyer, professional enough not to comment on family dynamics, just asked, "And in this letter, what do you want to leave?" She answered, "The part that is really mine." The night before she died, I didn't know it was the night before. I thought it was just another bad night. She was restless, pacing around the house, misplacing things, asking the same question 3 times. "Have you had dinner, girl?" "Yes, Grandma." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Then she stopped in the kitchen doorway and watched me for a few seconds. "Do you still pray?" she asked. It caught me off guard. "Sometimes." "What for?" "For strength." "Does it work?" "Sometimes." She nodded. "I prayed a lot to have a daughter," she said. "When God gave me one, I didn't know how to be a mother. Then I prayed not to be alone.
He gave me you.
I didn't know how to be a grandmother either. I kept quiet." She went on. "I wanted to give you affection. I gave you tasks. I wanted to bless you. I criticized you. I wanted to give you a name. I called you the girl more than Mariana." There was a lump in my throat. "If I can't go back and fix it," she said, "I can at least do this. Give you a choice." She slipped a small envelope out of the pocket of her apron. "If one day I forget you," she said, "open this." "What is it?" "My last instruction. I always liked giving orders, didn't I? Let me have the last one." She put the envelope in my hand, closed my fingers around it, and left the kitchen. I stayed there alone, with the uncomfortable feeling that this was a period dressed up as an ellipsis. I shoved the envelope into the back of my drawer and pretended it didn't exist. Pretending has always been a survival skill in that house. The next morning, I found my grandmother collapsed beside her bed. Heart attack. Quick, quiet, impatient. Just like her. The wake was a spectacle so predictable we could have sold tickets. My aunts by marriage wore black and "life is unfair" expressions. My uncles walked around like official administrators of other people's pain. My cousins took pictures of the coffin from a respectful distance, planning their sad music Instagram stories with the caption, "Rest in peace, warrior." I mostly sat on a hard pew, listening to strangers say, "Your grandmother was such a strong woman." Yes, she was. Strong enough to survive. Hard enough to hurt. At some point, people started asking, "So, where are you going now?" As if I were a piece of furniture with no assigned spot. I answered with my eyebrows. I already lived there. It was her house, not mine, but the furniture knew the weight of my body. The walls recognized my steps. No one asked if I wanted to stay. They just assumed I'd be gone. At the burial, my uncles gave teary speeches about sacrifices she made, gifts she'd given, advice she'd shared. No one mentioned the nights she cried alone in the kitchen because her husband had grabbed the secretary again. Or the times she smashed plates against the wall because her son had blown money on gambling. Some memories don't look good in cemeteries. After the funeral, they gathered in the living room of the house that suddenly belonged to no one and everyone. "We need to set a date with the lawyer for the reading," Roberto said. "Let's get this over with." Get this over with meant find out who got what. I watched from the corner. Not because I was so mature, but because when you've never really been in the game, you learn to watch without betting. 2 weeks later, we were all in that wooden office I mentioned. Book-lined walls, shelves organized by decorative importance more than content. Heavy desk, chairs that creaked when someone moved, a generic justice scale, painting on the wall. I chose the last chair, closest to the door. My back already knew, if things got unbearable, I'd have the shortest way out. My uncles sat up front, side by side, as if they owned the moment. My cousins spread around like they were waiting for a raffle prize. The lawyer came in, greeted us all with a restrained nod, and sat down. He placed 2 envelopes on the desk. One large, white. One smaller, brown, sealed with wax. "Let's begin," he said. Before he could open anything, my grandmother manifested. Not literally. She wasn't that theatrical. It was her voice in my head, her tone, her patterns. And then, in a way, it was her voice in that room too. Because, yes, she had written exactly what was about to happen. Roberto raised his hand. Before we start, sir, we just wanted to know if, he coughed, choking on his own intention, if everybody needs to be here. He glanced in my direction. Everybody, of course, meant the intruder. The lawyer frowned. Mrs. Helena requested that the reading be made with all airs and mentioned persons present. Carlos tried a careful approach. But Mariana is, he dragged the sentence, looking for a polite slur. She's Elisa's daughter. But, well, he didn't know how to finish that without sounding like the jerk he is. Beatrice, who never misses a chance to weaponize politeness, chimed in. She's not the biological daughter of either of the two sons, sir. I don't know how that works legally. The lawyer looked at me properly for the first time, as if realizing I was a person, not a legal inconvenience. Mrs. Helena specifically asked that Mariana be present, he said. My aunts put on their saintly, we accept this trial faces. Roberto, impatient, muttered.
Fine.
It's just important to be clear that, well, family is family, you know. That's when it came. Not from the lawyer. From my grandmother, via habit and memory. I heard her voice in my head, and the lawyer's voice followed, reading words that were unmistakably hers. He opened the main will and read the formal introduction, the legal warm-up. Then he said, before the distribution of assets, there is a statement from Mrs. Helena. He cleared his throat and read, I, Helena, declare that I raised my granddaughter Mariana out of obligation, not choice. That doesn't make her less worthy. It only makes me less capable. The room froze. The floor moved beneath my feet. Not because of the criticism. I'd been getting that all my life. It was the word granddaughter. For the first time in any official document, I existed with a bond that wasn't just chores and duty. My uncles shifted in their chairs. The lawyer went on. I understand that, from a biological and legal point of view, my sons Roberto and Carlos may question her place in this family. They've always believed blood was worth more than presents. I believed that for a long time too. But I learned, too late, that family is whoever stays, not whoever shows up on holidays. When he finished that section, Roberto couldn't contain himself. She had no right, he murmured. I thought. Funny. She had the right to raise you, feed you, bail you out of your messes, but not describe you. The lawyer kept going. When he started dividing assets in the main will, the knife sank in. House to Roberto. Land to Carlos. Savings split among the legitimate grandchildren. Lucas, Gustavo, and Beatrice. My name didn't show up. Not once. At the end, he closed the white envelope, took a breath, and said, and here ends the main will. Silence. A heavy silence, thick with meaning, expectation, and just a bit of smugness. Roberto turned to look at me.
He didn't need to say anything.
But he did. Mariana, he began, politely fake, you know there'll always be a place for you in the family, regardless of what's in the will. That's when the universe used my grandmother as a scriptwriter again. Her old lines echoed in my head. You're not family. But this time, the voice that cut through the room was the lawyer's. He slid the brown envelope to the center of the table. We still have the second envelope, he announced. If you've ever watched courtroom dramas, you know there's always that moment when everyone holds their breath, waiting for the big reveal. It felt just like that, except with less glamour and more overdue bills. The lawyer broke the wax seal slowly. He seemed to do it on purpose, to stretch the tension. Maybe he did. He unfolded a few pages and started reading. His tone shifted. He left the legal language and slipped into something more personal. If you are hearing this, it's because everyone has already listened to what I left in the main will. That is what my family expects of me. What is written here is what I expect of them. He paused. No one breathed. I spent my life believing blood ties were a sentence, that I owed everything to my children because they were mine. I forgot that being mine doesn't give anyone the right to use me. Roberto cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Carlos folded his arms over his chest. My hands stayed in my lap, fingers pressed tight to hide the shaking. My sons came around when I had something to give. My daughters-in-law came around when there was something to receive. My legitimate grandchildren came around when it was worth a photo for social media. The one who was there when I forgot who I was someone else. I could feel their eyes on me. Mariana doesn't owe me anything. I owe her everything. She lost a mother and, instead of gaining a grandmother, she got more work. She deserved to be a daughter, a granddaughter, a priority. Instead, she was an unpaid maid, babysitter, and nurse. And she stayed anyway. For the first time in my life, my uncles were quiet. The lawyer continued. Because of that, I declare that the distribution of assets made in the main document is annulled, unless Mariana decides otherwise. My house, my land, my savings, and everything in my name become the sole property of my granddaughter Mariana, daughter of Elisa. My sons, daughters-in-law, and legitimate grandchildren, if they want something, can rely on their memories. But I doubt they'll find much. The room detonated. This is absurd, Roberto shouted, jumping to his feet. Lucas, his oldest, widened his eyes, more worried about losing the beach house than losing his grandmother. She couldn't do this, Carlos added. She was manipulated. She was sick. The lawyer didn't flinch. The letter was written 6 months before her condition worsened. She was fully competent. There are attached medical reports supporting that. Beatriz slammed her hand on the table. She never liked us. She always sided with the victim. Victim was me. An interesting choice of word, coming from the people who had just lost their easy inheritance. Roberto pointed a finger at my face. You poisoned her against us, didn't you? Spent your time talking trash, acting like a poor little thing. I inhaled slowly. I remembered all the unanswered calls, all the "I can't today," all the excuses when I called begging for help during her worst episodes. I remembered the days I skipped work because she needed to see a doctor and no one offered to go. I remembered the family WhatsApp group, dead silent every time I mentioned her health, alive, and buzzing when someone suggested barbecue. I could have thrown that in their faces. But my grandmother had also taught me one other thing. How to ration. She rationed affection. I rationed words. I didn't say anything you didn't already know, I answered calmly. She just finally decided to listen. Carlos changed tactics, aiming for the legal angle. We'll contest this. Mom always said everything would be divided equally. She also always said she'd never forget her children, I replied. And she did. For a fleeting second, I saw something cross his face. Then he buried it under anger. Beatriz turned to the lawyer. Don't you think this is unfair? He adjusted his glasses. Fairness is a complex concept, miss. Legally, it's all in order. Morally, that's not my jurisdiction. The most honest sentence anyone spoke that day. From there, things became a battle. Not in court, in people's mouths. They started telling everyone I had scammed the old woman. Their words. At church, whispers. At the local grocery store, stares. At the bakery line, comments like, "These days you raise someone else's kid and they take your house." A distant aunt texted me asking if what people are saying was true. I replied, "That depends. What are they saying?" She changed the subject. My number quietly disappeared from a few family group chats. Others pretended nothing had happened. They just changed the type of memes they sent. Meanwhile, I, who'd never had anything, supposedly had everything. That's what people said. The house, the land, a sum of money I'd never seen in my life except in other people's stories. It sounded like a lot. But the real price had been paid years earlier, in installments, sleepless nights, lost jobs, visits I didn't make, parties I skipped, dreams I delayed. On a spreadsheet, I wasn't sure the math even favored me. I didn't feel rich. I felt relieved. For the first time, I didn't have to wake up at 5 to catch 2 buses. I could finish my master's degree without stacking yet another job on top. I could look at that house and know that if I changed the sofa, no one would complain about, "Your grandfather paid for that." The house was mine, with all its history, dust and ghosts. And there was another detail no one knew. I hadn't inherited just property. I'd inherited permission to rewrite the ending. A few days after the reading, I remembered the envelope she'd given me in the kitchen. The one I'd stuffed into the drawer like a time bomb under the bed. I pulled everything out. Old t-shirts, single socks, yellowed photos. The envelope was still there. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room half dark, and stared at it. Part of me was afraid of what it might say. Another part was more afraid of never knowing. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded into fourths, written in her handwriting, still firm, but already a little shaky. Mariana, if you're opening this, it's because you had the courage to dig in the drawer. I've always admired this annoying habit you have of looking for what hurts. It means that one day you'll dig in the right drawers inside yourself too. It took me a long time to understand that I treated you as an obligation, not as a choice. It took me even longer to admit that was my cowardice, not your fate. I wanted to give you affection. I gave you chores. I wanted to bless you. I gave you criticism. I wanted to give you a name. I called you girl a lot more than Mariana. So, since I can't go back in time, I'll do what I can now. Give you a choice. The lawyer will first read a will that pleases your uncles. For a few minutes, everything will look just like it always has. They get everything, you get nothing. Then he'll open the second envelope. The one that gives you justice. If you want, you can accept everything I left you. If you don't, you can give up part of it or all of it. I only ask you for one thing. Whatever decision you make it for you. Not out of fear of them. Not out of guilt for me. You've spent your life paying emotional bills you didn't run up. Enough. If you decide to keep it all, they'll call you greedy. If you decide to share, they'll call you naive. I know you'll find a way not to be either. I'm not good at apologies, so I won't ask for forgiveness. I'll ask for something harder. That you don't repeat with anyone what I repeated with my own mother. Don't treat the people who love you as obligations. And, if possible, one day, remember me with less anger than I deserve. With affection. Helena, your grandmother. Even when it didn't look like it. I finished reading and for the first time in a long time, I really cried. Not the exhausted crying of someone who's lost something. The crying of someone who finally found something they never had. Recognition. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't fix my childhood. But it put the truth in the only mouth that mattered. The one that had hurt me. My grandmother was never the I love you type. This was as close as she ever got. With the letter in my hand and her words lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat, I called the family in. Not at the lawyer's office. At the house that was now mine, and had always felt like theirs. I picked a Saturday. They arrived at different times, as if they didn't want to run into each other. Roberto walked in like he was about to negotiate a contract. Carlos came in a button-up shirt, despite it being the weekend. Their wives wore faces that said they didn't want to be there but refused to miss the drama. My cousins were visibly angry. They don't hide anger well. We sat in the living room. I took the couch. They spread themselves around in chairs and on the edge of furniture, like the seating arrangement could somehow balance the moral weight. I didn't waste time. I read the letter Grandma left for me, I said. Roberto rolled his eyes. Oh, here we go. Carlos tried diplomacy. Mariana, we understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I cut in. I'm tired. Upset I was at 12. After the diagnosis, I graduated to tired. Silence. I continued. I'm not here to argue about the will. It's done. Legally, everything's solid. Morally, that's between you and your pillows. Beatrice muttered. Easy to say now that you got everything. I looked straight at her. Do you want us to list who got what over the last 15 years, B? Because if we count presents, I'm still in the red. She quieted down. I took a breath. I called you here for another reason. I went on. Not to dig up the past, but to decide what we do with the present. Roberto crossed his arms. I want what's mine by right, he said. What exactly is yours by right, Roberto? I asked. Spell it out for me. The Sundays you only came here to borrow money? The times you disappeared when she fell in the bathroom and I called begging for help? Or the messages you ignored when I said she'd forgotten her own name? His face flushed. Carlos stepped in, trying to mediate. Mariana, don't make this harder. I'm not making it harder, I said. I'm making it honest. Grandma left everything to me because I stayed. You didn't. That was her choice. I'm not going to undo her choice just to fix her guilt. Lucas finally exploded. So, you're just going to leave us with nothing? This was the grandson she'd spoiled most. She'd bought him his first motorcycle, his first laptop, paid for his first expensive course, which he dropped halfway through. You're not left with nothing, I said. You've got a home, jobs, lives. What you lost was the illusion that you'd always be rewarded just for existing. Silence again. I felt my old, familiar guilt trying to surface. That instinct you develop when you grow up owing gratitude to someone who didn't know how to love you. The idea that any boundary you set is selfish. I remembered the letter. Whatever decision you make it for you.
So I did.
I didn't call you here to say you'd get nothing. I continued. I called you to say you won't get everything. They exchanged looks. What do you mean? Carlos asked. I'm going to sell the land, I said. I can't manage all that on my own. With the money, I'll pay off my debts, keep enough to rebuild my life, and the rest, I'll split between you. Roberto blinked. How much of it? That's the part you're not going to like, I said. It won't be equal. You didn't show up equally in her life. I'm done pretending you did. Beatriz snorted. There it is. Roberto and Carlos will get smaller shares, I explained. I'm not here to launder your guilt with her money. The grandchildren will get a fixed amount each. No difference between you. A grandchild is a grandchild. And how much do you keep? Lucas demanded, voicing what they all wanted to know. I keep enough to rebuild my life, I said. And the house. That's not up for discussion. Roberto shot up. This house has always been ours. This house has always been hers, I corrected. You lived here for a while. I stayed till the end. They all started talking at once. Carlos's wife whispered in his ear. Roberto stared at the ceiling, maybe hoping God would intervene in property law. My cousins wrestled with their anger and their math. I waited. When the noise died down, I spoke. You've got two choices. You accept the agreement, or you take it to court. Carlos gave me a long look. And if we contest it, you'll spend years, money, and energy, I said. I'll keep living my life with my lawyers, my paperwork, and her letter. Maybe you'll win something, but you'll have traded any chance of peace for a public brawl. I looked each one in the eye. Do you really want to go on local TV to explain why you're suing the granddaughter who took care of your mother while you were busy taking selfies at barbecues? Roberto exhaled long and hard. For a moment, I saw the kid he must have been before turning into the blunt, entitled man in front of me. I don't want to fight anymore, he said, exhausted. I just thought it would be different. So did I replied. I thought I'd have a grandmother. Instead, I got a boss. Life isn't very kind to expectations, is it? He dropped his gaze. Carlos finally spoke. We'll accept the deal. But this doesn't fix everything. That was never the goal, I said. Money fixes bills, not character. Beatriz glared at me with a hatred I no longer needed to carry. You've turned into someone very cold, you know that? I gave a tiny smile.
No.
I just stopped setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. After that day, the family was never the same. Then again, it never had been. My uncles accepted the agreement. Transfers were made. The topic moved out of center stage and down into the basement of unspoken resentment. At Christmas, when gatherings happened at all, things were more formal. Less fake hugging. More honest distance. Beatriz moved to another city, got a job at a nonprofit, and now lives posting quotes about breaking toxic patterns. Sometimes I wonder if she has any idea she was one of those patterns for me. Probably not. Lucas and Gustavo bounced between mediocre jobs, half-told stories about the inheritance we lost, and a chronic inability to face their own choices. My uncles age. Their wives keep cushioning every conflict with food and faith. I finished my master's. I opened a small office downtown. Most of my clients have strange family stories. Fathers who walked out. Mothers who hurt more than they held. Grandparents who are more rigid than loving. Children who carry the shame of their parents' failures. Sometimes mid-session someone says, "My mom always told me I owed her gratitude for raising me." I answer, Taking care of a child isn't a favor. It's a responsibility. You don't owe gratitude for having been cared for. You deserve respect for having survived. And while I'm saying that, a part of me is talking to the 12-year-old who used to make the bed of a woman who never said thank you. My house now, has changed. I painted the walls, swapped out some furniture, donated things that only served to gather dust and bitterness. I found old photos. In one, my mother is young, holding a baby.
Me.
Behind her, my grandmother, smiling for once, before the years carved their map into her face. I put that photo in a plain frame on the bookshelf, not as an idealized tribute, as a reminder of the mess we all are. Family is not a Christmas movie. It's a bunch of people trying not to repeat what hurt them, failing, succeeding here and there. The other day, while watering the plants on the balcony, I thought about something people have said to me ever since they found out I was the sole heir. In the end, you got everything. I disagree. I didn't get everything. I lost a mother too early, never had a father, spent my teenage years trying to earn a place in a house I cleaned, and in a family tree where I was always written in tiny print. What I got finally wasn't everything. It was partial justice. It was the chance to build a life where I don't have to constantly prove I deserve to stay. And for some reason, I still don't fully understand. That's enough. Sometimes I think about the wills no one writes, but everyone obeys. The invisible ones. Family lines like, men are just like that. Family is family. Blood is blood. You must be grateful to whoever raised you. Invisible clauses that bind people to places they don't need to be anymore. If my grandmother taught me anything in the end, it's that there's one inheritance more dangerous than any house, land, or money. The inheritance of stories. She spent her life sure she owed everything to her sons. She died trying to correct that in one drastic stroke. I spent my life convinced I owed gratitude just for not being abandoned in the street. Today, when someone says, "You're lucky your grandmother took you in," I answer, without anger, just precision. I had responsibility. Luck is something else. At the end of it all, the line that matters most to me isn't in the legal will. It's the one in the envelope she left in my drawer. Don't treat the people who love you as an obligation. I try. With my clients. With the few friends I've chosen. With the people who come and go in my life. Mostly with myself. Recently, someone asked, "Did you forgive your grandmother?" I thought about it. Before, I would have rushed to say yes, because that's what everyone expects of us. This time I said, I understand my grandmother. Forgiveness is just a word. What I did was something more useful. I stopped living like everything she did was a life sentence. The person frowned. I'm not sure I get it. Sometimes I don't either, I admitted. But I understand enough not to repeat it. That night, I sat at the same kitchen table where she had written that letter to me. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and wrote my own will. Not of assets. Of boundaries. I declare that, from now on, no one else decides whether I'm family or not. Family is who stays, but it's also who I choose to stay with. And I choose myself first. I folded the paper and put it in the same drawer. Maybe someone will find it someday. Maybe not. But for the first time, the main will of my life isn't in anyone else's hands. It's in mine. And that, more than anything, is an inheritance no one can take away. So tell me, in my place, would you have kept quiet and played the grateful orphan, or opened that second envelope and rewritten the story, knowing the whole family would call you greedy?